Memorizing the amount of whole steps or half steps between the two component notes of an interval is not how pianists learn intervals. Between C and D is a major second. This is also a diminished third. Between C and A flat is an augmented fifth. It's also a minor sixth. I want to explain the process of forming an interval and labeling one from the ground up. So first we'll start with the definition. What is an interval? It's the measurement of the space between two notes or two pitches. How do we measure distance on the keyboard? We do that by using whole steps and half steps. A half step is a note that is directly adjacent to another. So if I wanted to go up a half step from C, I'd end up on C sharp or D flat. If I want to go down a half step from C, I'd end up on B. A whole step is two half steps combined. If I wanted to go up a whole step from C, I'd go up two half steps. 1, 2, I've arrived on D, which is a whole step up from C. If I wanted to go a whole step down from C, I'd go two half steps down. 1, 2, boom. We end up on B flat, that's our whole step. Okay, now let's get into intervals. Intervals have two parts. The first part, and the most obvious part, is the numeric value. It's a number. This is a second, a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. The way that we determine the numeric value is by simply counting the letters that are traversed. From C to D, that's two letters, so that is a second. From G to D, G, A, B, C, D. It's 5 letters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a fifth. That's pretty straightforward. Things become complicated when we have to describe the quality of the interval. The quality is determined by comparison with the intervals found on a major scale. We'll take C major for example. No flats, no sharps, it's all white keys. We're going to introduce two interval qualities here. The major interval and the perfect interval. The major second is major. The third is major. The fourth is perfect. The fifth is perfect. Sixth is major. Seventh is major. And the octave, or the eighth, is perfect. How do we memorize that? We have 7 quantities, and now we have 2 qualities. Throughout history, the fourth and the fifth have been thought of as the most perfect, or the purest intervals, as well as the octave. And the octave is literally perfect, it's the same note. By memorizing the fourth and the fifth as perfect, and leaving the rest to be major, is the best way to memorize that. Fourth, fifth, and eighth are the perfect intervals. Second, third, sixth, and seventh are major. We have 3 other qualities of intervals: the augmented, diminished, and minor. Keep in mind that all intervals and all modifications that we make from this point on are based on the intervals that we've established using the major scale. The first modification is going to be the augmented. So both perfect and major intervals can be augmented, and we're going to start with a major fifth here, or the perfect fifth. A perfect fifth can be augmented by either raising the upper note by a half step or lowering the lower note by a half step. So here we go. I'm either going to raise the top note or lower the bottom. Those both form an augmented fifth. In order to form an augmented interval using a major interval, it's the same process. Either raise the upper note or lower the lower note. Here's our major sixth, augmented sixth. We're going to raise the top note or lower the bottom note. That's also an augmented sixth. We can also doubly augment an interval. take that augmented fifth and augment it another time. So from our original, which was the perfect fifth, an augmented fifth is where we raise it 1/2 step. If we raise it 2/2 steps, we end up with a doubly augmented fifth. And so that could either look like this, with the top note raised 2/2 steps, or the lower note lowered 2/2 steps. And the same exact rules apply to the major interval. We can doubly augment it. An augmented major sixth, we either raise that top note or lower the bottom note. Do that twice when we're doubly augmenting it. Same process here. Okay, moving on to diminished and minor intervals. The process of making intervals smaller is a little bit more complicated than augmenting them, because perfect intervals and major intervals go through a different process. First, we'll start with perfect intervals because those are easier. We're going to start with the perfect fourth. The perfect fourth is between C and F. If I wanted to diminish it and make it smaller, I could either lower the top note by 1/2 step, or I could raise the bottom by 1/2 step. Both processes form a diminished fourth. Here we go. We could lower the top note or raise the bottom note. Major intervals can be made both minor and diminished. So let's take a major interval. We're going to make it minor. We can either lower the top note by 1/2 step or raise the bottom note by 1/2 step. In both cases, we are making it a minor interval. But in order to make that diminished, we have to first learn our minor interval and then lower that by another 1/2 step. So take your minor interval, in order to form the diminished, lower it by another. This right here is the diminished third. We can also take the lower note from the major third, raise it in order to make a minor third, raise it another 1/2 step in order to create a diminished third. Okay, so that's a lot of rules. I want to simplify it a little bit. First, let's go ahead and start with all of the intervals that we established at the very beginning of the video, perfect and major intervals. Perfect intervals, as well as major intervals, can become augmented or doubly augmented. I'm just going to write ×2 at the top. Perfect intervals can become diminished. In order to form a diminished interval, the major intervals have to go through another process. They become minor first, and then they can become diminished.